So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Illinois Tech Social Sciences Great Problems, Great Minds Seminar Series. So for today's seminar, you can submit questions during the webinar by typing in the chat box. We will have a Q&A section at the end of the webinar, so you can unmute yourself to ask a question or type the questions in the chat box. So today's speaker is Professor Yongmei Lu. So Professor Yongmei Lu is a professor of geography and chair of the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies at Texas State University. Her research and teaching interests fall under the broad umbrella of geographic information science and application of spatial analysis and modeling to examine how population well-being is shaped by human environmental interaction. Specifically, topic areas include health and healthcare access, food security, urban development and health challenges, and crime, criminal behavior. Her research has been funded by federal, state, and university grants, such as NSF, U.S. Department of Justice, and U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And Dr. Lu has published extensively in major geography, public health, and environmental journals, resulting more than 75 peer-reviewed publications and 2 books, such as the Professional Geographers, the Annals of American Association of Geographers, the Lancet, Science of Total Environment and Computers, Environment and Urban Systems. And today she will talk about her recent works on gentrification and health in Austin, Texas. So it's very delightful to welcome Professor Lu.
Thank you, Hao. That was a very nice introduction. Thank you, everyone, for creating time and visit with me this afternoon. We already past noon time. So I understand that we have about 1 hour for this talk. So I will try to stay on time. I know that I may have more slides than I can likely show and discuss in details. So I may run through some relatively quick, but feel free to ask questions or stop me. How? Please check time for me. Yeah, again, okay. Thank you. Very pleasure to be here. Sorry I cannot be there in person, but in the meantime, I'm happy that I don't have to travel to Chicago during this season, and we're supposed to get to the 70s by around 3 p.m. today, but still it feels like it's still relatively cold now. It's like about 40, 42 degree. So my topic today it's about the gentrification and health. Just to give you a quick idea about what I'm going to try to cover. So I will start talking a little bit about background in Austin city development, and then share with you all today a empirical study we did about gentrification and health in Austin. And then I like to engage in some discussion about the challenges and opportunities for doing research on gentrification and the health impacts. So this is Texas. And you can see that the major road that connect from the south, major cities in Texas, from south in San Antonio through Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, all the way to the north, and that's the Interstate Highway 35. And this is very important because it passes right through Austin. And here you can see Austin, the outline here. And I-35 is really important. It does not just physically split the city into two parts, but also socioeconomically, demographically, and culturally to a degree. So historically, Austin now has a city itself has now more than 1 million population, and probably around 38% of population is Hispanic. And in the 70s, that split Hispanic population was probably 12% or 15%. And then Black population was 12%. And now Black population is only like 7-8% for the city. So there is a big overall city demographic change. But more than that, it's not just demographic change. The changes are at a larger scale, multiple aspects. It's also landscape and culture. And Austin has been one of the most fastest growing cities in the United States. And it has lots of opportunities, but it faces also challenges. And one of those is the urban development and what that brings to population to its long-term residents. So when we talk about the history of Austin city, and it cannot avoid the topic of redlining, and that probably many of us know occurred in the 1930 to early 40. And that was a process led by homeowners loan corporation. And basically they color coded the neighborhoods in major cities. And they color code those into 4 different colors. So you will see here from a green to kind of a bluish, gray, yellow, and red. Redlining refer to those neighborhoods that were colored as red, meaning that should not invest in there, and lending would be very difficult. And this is the map back then developed for the city of Austin. As you can see clearly like the east versus west. And I-35 was built later, kind of the road was built and developed into I-35 later, just further reinforced that pattern of east-west split. So historically, to the east, those neighborhoods to the east and did not get enough opportunity for development. They did not get enough investment, and mostly long-term residents there was Black minorities. But the recent development brought a big change there, and there are some studies on gentrification process and focus or use Austin as case study. So this one, it was not just Austin. Austin was one of the 14 cities. And you can see that this part, when it discusses Austin, and it talks about long history of spatial segregation and related to the process of redlining we just talked about. And the outcome to the right, as highlighted, you can see the discussion about how African-American and Latino communities are still being displaced. And also there are phenomenal observations related to health, obesity, diabetes, and also access to health and healthcare and insurance. So not just that. And when we talk about East Austin, remember Austin is very kind of cultural city, and we're proud of our air quality is good, and we don't have that much heavy industry, traditional industry, and it's a cultural city, it's a musical city, and the life, if you lived here long and you have your neighborhood where you grow up, and you can probably think of something like that like this. That store, that place I'm very familiar with, we used to go there. So it's a place, it's a lot of also connection with that place. But more and more we see these places one day become this. And these are not pictures I took. These are from a report in 2015. It talks about that exactly that store used to sell piñata and very well known and long time being there, and got demolished. Okay, so here you can see that the reason the current property tax structure in Texas, however, makes it very difficult for long-time residents to keep their homes. And they're talking about hipsters, the culture and in people and culture and the lifestyle are moving in and pushing the old people, the long-term residents there, not old people, long-term original people there. And so there are more studies kind of following this same trend. This was also conducted in 2015 and discuss about how the city, based on market changes, and the city allocated resources to develop these neighborhoods, but they did not really help all different communities equally, especially those disadvantaged, long-term disadvantaged neighborhood and their residents, they got negatively impacted. So the city also, is fully aware of this, and in November 2020, through the last election, and there was a appropriation was passed, and then so allocated $300 million to do this, led by the City of Housing and Planning Department. There is this anti-displacement initiative by the City of Austin. So for that, they did the first stage, that's a 13-year project. The first stage, they map out where are these vulnerable neighborhoods. So based on their 3 parts of analysis, find out what vulnerable population, look at demographic change, and then look at residential market appreciation, look at the housing values and the housing value change. So they classify the neighborhoods into 4 different categories, from just about to be not yet vulnerable neighborhoods to those all the way kind of historical exclusion, those neighborhoods that have already been going through, probably are still going through the process. So this map shows roughly, if you look at the red part, the yellow part, and the blue part, these are roughly where the vulnerable and chronic displacement and active displacement neighborhoods are. And now I want you to pay special attention to this place, this part, and this is East Austin, as we just talked about, east of I-35. And I highlighted this because I want to discuss some of our empirical study, and we did some study, and the focus area is also this part of the city. So there are, I just showed a few studies, and there are more looking into, and Austin and its urban issues related to urban gentrification is getting more attention from both government, the public, and academia. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean by gentrification. So gentrification is a process. It is a process during urban development when urban neighborhood changes. The change mostly are related to influx of more affluent people and households. So it is a good thing. You bring people in, affluent people in, you bring money in, you bring business back. So often with gentrification, we see increase in rent, shifts in neighborhood demographic characteristics, and change of economic and cultural landscape in the neighborhood. And the outcome of this is not just those change. This will have been or will continuously affect communities or a neighborhood's history and culture. And for some people, it reduces social capital for residents there, for the existing communities there. And in 2013, CDC officially had a report talking about gentrification and health impacts. So officially, identified the health issue as one of the issues from urban gentrification. So the question is really, well, gentrification is a well-known, well-recognized problem, and there are lots of discussion, speculation about the impact of gentrification and health is included there. So the challenge is, how do we prove? How do we, conceptualize this when we connect health and gentrification? And is there a connection, or how and why such connection is there, and what, how this connection look like? So when we talk about gentrification, we know that, okay, it happens in a space, and it happens, it's not just for individual people, it occurred in the city as an urban development process. So people have, you have multiple people, you have multiple communities and living the population group living there, they share space. But it is important to recognize that not all of these people share the same experience. Okay, so it's shared space, but different experiences in there. So it may actually create or exacerbate disparities across different population group. And for some population group, there is a displacement issue. And so they're not just people physically relocated to different places. And the cost for that, for the outcome of that is also includes loss of belongings, loss of the feeling of belongings, lots of kind of a loss of identity. And you lose your connection with community. And all of this needs to kind of lead to a concern related to social injustice, especially for the disadvantaged groups. For some populations, some communities, they benefit. So it's not that gentrification is bad. Even for health, it's not necessarily always bad. And this is showing literature that there is a beneficial, positive health outcome for some population group, for some people, but also detrimental impact for other people, especially the vulnerable population. So the question is, does gentrification impact residential health? Okay, so what I want to talk next quickly, just to show an empirical study we did in Austin, and this was the data collection, and most of the data analysis actually were led by one of my students, Ayodaji. And this study was conducted recently during actually 2020. And the goal was to really understand Austin, from Austin residents, long-term residents' perspective in East Austin, how do they perceive gentrification? Do they feel it? Do they see it? How do they see it? And what do they feel about it? Okay, and also to analyze if there is a link, association, some sort of association, not necessarily causation, but if there's a link between gentrification and health. So what we did here is, as I was talking about, the shared space, different experiences. So here how we measure gentrification, different from many existing studies. They may look at the population demographic change in the neighborhood. They may look at, okay, go to the street and count the different coffee shops, different type A, type B, different types of businesses, or they may check property value appreciation trend. So for our study, we want to emphasize experience, how people experience it, how they feel it, their personal experience, and that should be directly related to how they actually were exposed to gentrification. So what we use here is a perceived gentrification. And also we use self-reported health data. All right, so here's a study area. This is actually the one you saw in a previous map I highlighted in red, that were most of the neighborhoods in this area east of Austin were also identified as vulnerable or actively being gentrified or chronically being gentrified neighborhood by the City of Austin Department of Housing and Planning. Okay, so we did a survey, and because of pandemic, we did online survey. And during a period of 3.5 months, we got 340 completed online survey. And then we also did in-depth interview, and this sample is not large, mostly due to the challenge from the pandemic. And this was, remember, in the summer, fall of 2020, that was still kind of the relatively early stage of this pandemic. So it was not easy to do. None of those interviews were in person, actually. We did a Zoom interview mostly. So the survey core questionnaire, we cover a few aspects that include the places of residence, and where do they live? Do they live in those neighborhoods there? Which part of Austin? And the social demographic information, and also their access to social economic resources. This is very important. Is how easy for them to, to have access to financial support. How easy it is for them to have access to health services. And then we have a perceived neighborhood change. What do they see in their neighborhood in terms of, new structures, renovation, demolitions, and the building modeling change, landscape change, and the perceived gentrification. This one is like a 5-point Likert scale measurement from extremely likely, extremely unlikely. Okay, and then we also look at the neighborhood, trying to evaluate neighborhood tie or social cohesion. So for that, we looked at 3 aspects: neighborhood interaction, neighborhood attraction, and the cohesion there. And for health, we use self-rated health that include general overall health, physical health, and mental health. So for mental health, we looked at depression, anxiety, stress, and we also look at chronic health conditions. That's one more aspect. So here, this just a quick look at what we mean by mental health. What did we ask them? The questionnaire asked the survey participants to check which one applies to their situation. Chronic, this chronic health condition. So the first part I'm going to report first part, the interview outcome. The sample is not that large. When we collected the data, actually those interview participants were recruited from those who did the online survey. And we only recruited those who have been living here for more than 10 years. So for this interview, each of them went between 12 and 40 minutes, roughly. And we coded the interview and analyzed the transcript according to content analysis methods. And Naval and Voyal tools were used to analyze the data we collected. So it is interesting to see that from the transcript analysis, and these are the kind of frequency, shows the frequency, how frequently the different words are used. So neighborhoods, when people talk about their neighborhood and gentrification, and neighborhood, the people, life, property, these are the words that used a lot. And then we trying to identify, that is just a visual. And we trying to identify some themes to interpret how people view what gentrification is. So a quick summary, we can clearly see a few themes here, a few different aspects that are highlighted. People perceive gentrification by looking at or feel that through demographic change, physical change, and affordability of living there, house affordability, or the possibility of displacement. So these are just a few examples of the quote that from the interview, what we got. this one is example showing that demographic change is, something that people feel clearly. And here for Austin, it's clearly a loss of historical Black community, and Hispanic community is also impacted. And physical change, people see, vacant lots got, redeveloped, and the people see new business there, and also new architectural style. If you remember from one of the, earlier literature I shared, and there is criticism about, okay, the hipster lifestyle is moving in there and pushing the old long-term residents there. This just echoes what that happened there. And affordability, housing becoming more and more unaffordable for some people, and the vulnerable, disadvantaged population has been pushed out of this area. And also we got some clearly theme from this interview talking about how they perceive health impact of gentrification. So the residents there, and they feel clearly, they use the word related to, I worry a lot. It's worrisome, it's very stressful to see this thing going on. So that's kind of a level of mental stress there. And if we look at the relative frequency of the words used, these are the 9 participants, and we can see the stress is used more by certain participants, and then mental health. These 2 kind of stand out relatively more. All right, and also people connect health impact with environmental quality. Trees are removed, air quality is going down, and also people mention that parking become more difficult, and it's not as safe for their kids to play in the streets. And those kind of discussion clearly show out, but I don't have time to discuss all of those here, but just some examples. So participants perceived the gentrification in this study in East Austin as a source of environmental stress and a form of social injustice. Though participants acknowledged the positive impacts of gentrification. Yes, we did have participants, and they said that they do confirm, okay, there are good things, not everything is bad. But in the meantime, they recognize and emphasize the negative impacts on health and well-being. Okay, so and then from the survey data, we also did some quantitative analysis, and because of timing, I'm not going to go through the analysis details. Mostly I'm going to focus on just sharing some of the things we find. So first question we ask through the quantitative analysis, our overall second question, is to look at if perceived gentrification is associated with residents' self-reported health. That include physical, mental, and general health. And we did find that perceived gentrification was positively and significantly associated with participants' self-reported general and physical health. And this is even after we control for the access to social economic resources. So after you control for that, and we still find a positive and significant association. But perceived gentrification and self-reported mental health connection was negative. And that connection actually disappears if we becomes insignificant when we control for access to social economic resources. Okay, so meaning that when people perceive higher level of gentrification, it seems like negative association. Their self-reported health and mental health also go low. Okay, gentrification higher, their self-reported mental health go low. But this kind of negative association disappears when we control for access to social economic resources. And this is just from data showing that how the different aspects of health, overall health, and physical health, mental health are related to kind of how that in the data are related to educational attainment or maybe related to race, ethnicity, background. Okay, so the next thing we quickly wanted to look at is how the perceived gentrification may be related to chronic health conditions. And we did find that they are significantly and positively related, meaning that the perceived gentrification becomes worse, higher, and then chronic health conditions become worse as well. So there is significant relationship there. Depression in our data, this is interesting. And we have exposure measurement is perceived gentrification, and the dependent variable is depression. And there are a whole bunch of other variables there included in the model. We did multilinear regression, but also we're trying to do a pathway analysis and trying to find out how, if there is a relationship, how depression is connected to perceived gentrification, through what? Okay, so we find significant factors that contribute to this relationship. But what I want to highlight is here, the pathway analysis. And among this, we were able to find that these are the solid lines shows direct impact. These are the factors that directly related in our data was revealed. Those are the factors were revealed that to be directly related to depression. All right, so we have stress, we have self-reported mental health, but also childhood health and perceived gentrification and social demographic characteristics of neighborhood. And also here again, access to social economic resources. These are all directly related to depression. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the details of all the things here, but here's a quick visual of how they're related, especially here. I can see childhood health, and self-reported mental health, stress, and this is a perceived gentrification scale. These are directly related to stress. So gentrification shows a positive association with depression, but cannot be taken as a single contributive factors. There are others. This relationship, this pathway is pretty complex, and further researchers are needed here. So this case study, of course, has its limitations. It's a cross-sectional design, and we just have a data from one time point. It does not have the power as longitudinal studies that will probably enable the researchers to explore causation relationship. And here it's mostly really association, correlation relationship. And then there are some confounding biases because there are other sources for stress and health risks that were not included in the study, and the study did not consider latent period of gentrification. It takes time for health effect to show, but we somehow have control over this because we, in our data, we also considered their how long they've been living there in the neighborhood. And of course, our study has a sampling bias. One is that it's a convenience sampling. It's through a Facebook campaign online survey. And then we recruited the interview participants from those who did the online survey. And clearly there was gender bias, especially for the interview participants. They're all actually, we did 9, they're all female. So for future, there are quite a number of things we may pursue if possible. One is see if we can do longitudinal study with funding and more resources. And 2 was to compare different multiple study sites and see if we can do similar thing, use similar instrument for other cities. And three, some variables, for example, the perceived gentrification, and we measure it by Likert scale, and that needs to be or can be tested and validated in other settings. So that's for specifically for this empirical study, and we have some papers related here. If people are interested in getting them, I'm more than happy to share. So back to the general question. So we look at it, we're trying to look at this and trying to get a sense about how gentrification and health are related. Or in this one, I said, does gentrification impact residential health? And sometimes, as I said, we may not be able to review a causation relationship, but at least then we can look at if gentrification is related to health. So when we talk about gentrification in urban neighborhood and how that urban neighborhood development may be related to health, so it's probably help us to just sit back a little bit and think about generally when we talk about environment and health, particularly urban environmental and health. And frequently we know people cite, and we go back and cite on human ecology approach. And here is a triangle of human ecology when we look at human health. So in this, we look at population. It's population health, people's health. But one person is different from the next. One community is different from the next. One subgroup of population is different from the other. So population itself changes, but still, if you control for population, you put the same people, same population there, and they will interact with environment, habitat. Gentrification is a change in habitat. Okay, so it's a habitat is changing. Population is the same, habitat changes, and that will bring some health outcomes. Right, and for that habitat, it includes natural, physical, or you can say physical environment, social structure environment, and built environment. Okay, but when population interact with environment, and there is this behavior, population behavior exposure, behavior aspect. So behavior actually is a observable aspect of culture. That's one way of explain behavior and how behavior impact or behavior is embedded or behavior is associated with community and population. So behavior actually exposes individual and population to some hazards and protects them from others. Okay, but some of those behaviors, like we choose to drive, or you choose to walk, or you choose to bike. And some that we don't have an option, we're limited to certain behavior. Okay, and culture creates social organization, status, power, and the control of resources. Culture creates beliefs, systems, values, and perceptions. And culture develops technology. So all of those are related to the behavior vertices here in this ecology triangle for human health. And all of this applies to, when we talk about this, applies to, when we connect to urban gentrification. So urban gentrification, again, started from a change in habitat. And then population and behavior, they're connected. The long-term community and the residents there, they have their own culture, their behavior pattern, their tradition, and also their limitation. Okay, so when the habitat change, and that touch on their behavior, their trigger needs certain kind of behavior, tradition change to adapt to the new environment. Some population will be able to, some will not. Some are at advantage to adapt to the changes in habitat, and some they just cannot. So same space, same urban gentrification process, that may mean totally or drastically different things for different people. Again, back to the topic about shared space, but different experiences. So this also remind us geographers there. I know this is Department of Social Sciences, but I'm sure that, we have geographers there and people who are familiar with, some geographic work, geographic study. So we have the famous Dr. Yi-Fu Tuan, and he's our kind of a wonderful, very strong statement related to space and place. So space is objective. It is a location. It has no social connection there. It's like if you really think about urban, well, it's there regardless of whoever lives there, it's the same. The structures may be the same. But when you think about people, it's different. Same people see same street layout, different people see the same street layout, different people come to the same store, and they are going to feel totally differently. So then that brings place. Place is a location created by human experiences, and it carries specific meaning for human beings. So urban gentrification is not just a change of that space. It is a change in terms of a place for people, right? Because of that change, some people lost their long time connection with the neighborhood. They lost their neighborhood. Even though they may be able to stay, it's not the same neighborhood anymore. And some people actually have to be relocated. All right, so place is not only a fact to be explained in the broad frame of space, but it is also a reality to be clarified and understood from the perspectives of the people who have given it meaning. This is how I'm just trying to say that when we look at gentrification, it's not just you stay above and beyond, like you look on a map. Look down into a space and see, oh, there are some 10 new houses there. The 5 houses or 5 structures got demolished, and 3 new businesses came in, and what's the percentage change of different population subgroup? It's not just that. It's really for those people who are in that space, how their experiences changed. And so that's also, what we say, where we live and all the places that we move through in our daily life affect our health. It's places we move through that affect our health. If you have nothing, no connection, no attachment with that space, it may not really mean a place for you. Of course, when we measure urban neighborhood and measure the environmental there, or think about the habitat, one of the 3 vertex I shared on the in the human ecology, triangle ecology of human, triangle of human ecology. And then a habitat is also environment, right? So we can talk about, for urban environmental change, for gentrification, we can talk about structural environment, physical environment, social environment. I'm not going to go through the details of all these aspects, but there are certainly different aspects. We define them and you measure them. These are all relevant, but remember, for all of those, you want to think from a human being's, people's perspective, right? Look at the environment as a place, not just a space. So again, back to the theme, it's a shared space. So when we look at gentrification, if we only look at, okay, this is just space, then you can always measure it as, okay, what's the population demographic change, percentage of different population group changed in the past 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. All right. So how many new business we got and how many new coffee shops, you can measure those. But what you are missing is how the residents experience it. Some people feel gentrification, some people probably did not. Some people see it positive, some people feel more like the negative part. And also the long-term versus short-term impact or experience. People may be excited at the beginning, seeing new business, seeing money come in, seeing more coffee shops. They may feel, after a while, no, it's actually, they come in, but they don't really mean much for me. So that has to be really from a human perspective to understand it. This is why for our study, I just explained, we wanted to use perceived, want the survey participants to tell us how they felt about it. It's not perfect, but it's the reason we use that rather than use census data, look at census tract level and trying to generate the indexes and trying to identify gentrification, gentrifying the neighborhood, or in the process of being gentrified or about to be gentrified, different types of neighborhoods. So when we connect that, first thing is on the left, trying to define or trying to decide how we're going to define gentrification, how we're going to measure it, so that how we identify neighborhood that are at risk or being in the process of or already being gentrified, different types of neighborhood. And then when we talk about the health outcomes, and we also need to consider different aspects, what health are we looking at? And they're different, as even though just the empirical study I quickly reported, but you already saw that, the relationship outcome related to physical health, mental health, they're not necessarily the same. The relationship changes, okay? And also we want to know whose health we're looking at. Some people do benefit, even if we had only 9 in-depth interview, and we did have people tell us, they benefit, they like it, they enjoy it. It's really from their perspective, where they come from, what background they are. Yeah, okay. So there are beneficial and there are detrimental health outcomes, and we need to define that clearly before we do any analysis. And are we looking at the health outcomes at individual level or population level? And then how do you define, if you're looking at the population group, how do you define them? Based on social economic status, based on race? We often mix them. And I'm not sure if you always say minority is a disadvantaged group. Not always. So you need to be very careful and put in context. And then if after we define these two clearly and being able to operationalize our definition and being able to get data, and then we'll be able to consider, okay, in this relationship between gentrification and health, what are the mediators, what are the moderators, and what are the confounders and stuff. So another thing I want to discuss here is this is also why we use perceived gentrification, because really it's people in place, what they experience. So it's in health and environmental health, environmental exposure measurement is always a challenge and an important theme. And in general, environmental exposure, and we all know that we've been discussing this for a while, to move from place-based to people-based, people-centered measurement, air pollution and air quality, good or bad, it's not the same for everyone. Someone may be outside, someone may spend most of their time inside and they're not impacted as much. So you cannot just, again, back to the issue of ecological modifiable area problems, okay? So, and I want to argue that when we look at gentrification, we should also consider taking this kind of environmental exposure framework and look at how people the subjects we're looking at or are exposed to urban gentrification. Okay, so well, in terms of a typical geographic or spatial epidemiology studies, when we talk about the environment, we have, this kind of 3D space we're trying to describe. This is how we define environment. And then we assume, okay, everyone inside is the same. So if this is neighborhood, urban neighborhood, it's going through gentrification, we define, okay, here's a neighborhood, here's the level of gentrification, there you go. All the people, all the communities inside are the same. That's the limitation here. And people-centered gentrification study, we do that, we should be able to, take a Euclidean framework and follow your subjects, follow your population that you're studying, and find out how their life course or their experience during your study period. And we should be able to try, that's a goal, to be able to model how exposure to gentrification may vary from one to the other, from one individual to the other individual, from one group of people to another group of people, based on their life course, their individual different life trajectory. So with advanced more computational technology, better data, and this is something we did not have in the empirical study I just reported. Okay, we did not have a kind of through time following people. We took just a cross-sectional data there. So that's considering time, I'm just going to stop here by emphasizing that urban gentrification, it's really, we need to remember, it's a shared space, different experience, and we want to look at, emphasize people's experience and take a people-centered approach, and probably being able to borrow our success from exposure study and see we can, to improve when we move forward, and to improve our study when we try to understand the relationship between urban gentrification and health. Well, this one was just a link to a song I heard the other day, and I do like it. I feel your pain because I was right there with you. So for gentrification, no, you cannot just look from above and look at a map and you tell people what the experience is, what the impact is. You really need to go there and understand people's experience, understand how they are exposed to gentrification, to be able to connect to that or understand if there is any connection with health. I'll stop there. Thank you.
I think Professor Lu gave a very insightful talk about how actually the gentrification affect health in terms of both health and the cultural perspective and the environmental perspectives. So I think we currently open the questions. So to see if there are any questions from the audience. Jeff?
Kevin beat me, so take Kevin's first.
Oh, okay, Kevin. Kevin have two questions. So first thing is, assuming low income hurts mental health, is there a difference between how owners versus renters are affected by gentrification? And the second question is assuming poor mental health hurts income, is it possible your models understand the mental health problems because folks with mental health issues were priced out of neighborhood before you could survey them?
Good questions. I'm also trying to read in the chat here, so that helps me to understand what the questions are about. But I think they're both very good questions. So the first one, Kevin, you said assuming low income hurts mental health. I'm not sure if there is how strong the connection is between income and mental health. Another connection I don't see very clear here is owners and the renters. I would assume when you ask this question, so how gentrification may impact owners impact differently when we compare owners and renters. It's mostly about affordability. If you look at our research, and we did not really emphasize owners versus renters. It's really about affordability. Can people afford to live there or not? I understand it tends to be generally in most cities that owners tends to have it tends to be long-time residents than renters. But I'm not sure if because some renters, it's really related. I think the different cities and urban settings you are studying, because some renters, they have a very strong sense of belonging and they live there long enough as well. So our research, if to answer the question, we did not really separate owners and renters there. And the second question, assuming poor mental health hurts income. Is it possible your models underestimate understate mental health problems, because folks with mental health issues were priced out of the neighborhood before you could. This is a very good point. Yes, I did not explain how where our survey participants come from. They're all current residents. So really not just those with mental health issues. For those whoever were already priced out or displaced, we were not able to include those in our survey study. So that does not include them, and whatever we did, we find about through our empirical study cannot reflect their experience. What we did was we did look at how long they've been living in the neighborhood. So that variable got controlled if they stayed. I hope that sort of answer your question, Kevin.
Okay. Then Jeff.
Yeah, I guess my question goes to your time evolution work, and kind of relates back to Kevin's question as well. You're trying to follow people who stay in the neighborhood, but in a lot of the places that I've seen where gentrification has been, I don't know if the word is actually successful. Maybe the word is where gentrification occurred, a lot of the people who started in that neighborhood are no longer there. And so do you try to follow them as they move out? Especially here in Chicago, we see a lot of people moving across state boundaries and things after their neighborhoods were gentrified.
Yeah, great point. In the study I reported, we were not able to. So the way we recruited survey participants. Again, that was during the first summer of pandemic. And so we had to, originally, we were going to do more kind of traditional, even street intercept interview and the survey. But because of pandemic, we had to move online. So what we did actually, the very first response a potential participant will have to give us is to click on the map, interactive map, click on roughly where they live. So if that location is out of our identified, that defined area, and that survey, that participant is not provided opportunity to follow through the whole survey. So that's not included. So all we included are those who are still living in that defined neighborhood. And of course, we asked them how many years they've been living there. So I can say that our findings are, controlled by how long they live there. But for those who, if they are still, they moved, but they moved, but they are still in that neighborhood, they're fine, they're included. I should not say that neighborhood, that part of the city, because it's multiple neighborhoods there. But if they moved out, they cannot. So ideally, when I talk about people-centered exposure approach, we should, Jeff, we should follow those people and find out their experience as well. And there are some studies talking about people who got displaced, they move out. And then so there are studies talking about most, based on what I read, actually they downscale. They move to places where it's not as well off. So yeah, long term, ideally, we should in the future follow up and trying to find out what's going on, what happens to them and their health situation, and also their perception of gentrification.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
So I also have a question actually related to, you mentioned based that in Austin case, the gentrification generally negatively related to the mental health. So which means it is decline the people's mental health. So which is kind of within the framework of how the gentrification actually the debate is have for positive and the negative impacts on the city in terms of health. So what's your opinion? The differences, some places have for the positive impact, but some places have for the negative impact. What factors could be contribute to this difference?
Great question. How I think this is connected to what Jeff just asked, but maybe the other way. Remember, in our samples, we looked at people who currently are living there. So I felt I should have clarified this. So that means those could be people who are vulnerable. They are in a group of facing the risk of being displaced. But it could also be people who are gentrifiers. They moved in. They are gentrifiers. So that's why when we control access to social economic resources, that include financial services, but also health services and other things, the relationship changes. So when you control that, the relationship changes. Because really, again, this is a limitation. it's hard. One thing we could do is to use the time, how long they lived there, when they move in, to roughly classify them into being gentrified, they being gentrified group and they gentrifier group. But in our model, in this model I reported, we did not separate them.
Oh, I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So we
yeah.
did not
So
separate them. So you have those who are disadvantaged, vulnerable population. You also have those who belong to those that influx of better social economic status population group.
I see. So we need a better data to
Yeah, right. So it's a sort of a mix. It's a
I see. Thank you so much. I think if I see you have any other questions. So if there's no questions, I think we already passed the time. It's thank you so much again for very great talk to us. So we learned a lot from your wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. We usually give the applause to the speaker.
Thank you, Hao. Thank you, Jeff, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. Take care.
Thanks.